Good afternoon, everybody. This is probably, hopefully, going to be a short lecture. We don't have a ton of slides to cover. We did this in conjunction in class with a bunch of different videos from that Apocalypse World War II documentary series. I have attached all of those videos to Google Classroom along with the watching guide, so you can look at what film clips we actually watched as we were talking about these things. A lot of them are in conjunction with this first slide that we're looking at, which is German victories in Europe. Germany is having a lot of success in the war, basically from September 1st when they invade Poland. September 1st, 1939, they take over the Danzig corridor. The first shots of the war are fired on Danzig. And on September 3rd is when France and Britain declare war. And so that really is the first victory, German victory of the war, is taking back Danzig, closing up that Danzig corridor, and defeating Poland in 4 weeks. Prior to this, Hitler had made his non-aggression pact with Stalin, which basically just prevented a two-front war. Hitler knew that Germany could not win a two-front war, probably. They couldn't 25 years prior to this in World War I, and so they didn't want to do that again. So this non-aggression pact with Stalin kind of blew everybody's mind because Hitler hated communists, communists hated Hitler, but they are somehow able to come to an agreement because Stalin didn't want to go to war with Hitler either. And also, there was a secret part of the agreement, which was that they would split Poland. Poland is kind of in between Germany and the Soviet Union. They were going to come together, and they ended up splitting the nation down the middle. And Poland disappears from the map for about the 10th time this year that we've looked at. It's not going to reappear for quite a long time. But there was another component to that agreement, which it gave Hitler a common border with the USSR. He knew eventually he was going to invade them, and it is much easier to invade your neighbor when they are right next door rather than having to march through somebody else's yard. That's what Germany did in World War I when they went through Belgium. It slowed them down. The plan didn't work because it slowed them down, so they don't want to deal with that again. So now they've got that common border. They're not fighting the Soviet Union right now. It means they can focus on the other side, which would be France and Belgium and Holland and Denmark and a couple of those countries. So when France and Britain declare war on September 3rd, 1939, they don't have armies, or at least they don't have expeditionary forces, armies that can go overseas. After World War I, everybody pretty much disarmed. There was an act, kind of an international act that disarmed these major powers, and disarmament only works if everybody does it, and it didn't work because Hitler didn't do it. He built up the army anyways in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles limited Germany to 100,000 troops, and they violate that. Somewhere around 1936, he starts rearming, and in class we talked about the two main branches of the military that are involved in the continent, which obviously Germany has a navy, but on the continent you've got the Wehrmacht, the army, and then you've also got the Luftwaffe, the Air Force. So you've got army and Air Force. These are the two major components of what we call the Blitz, or the Blitzkrieg, translates to lightning war. The Blitzkrieg, lightning war, is going to be waged on the western border of Germany. That's what they're going to use against France, against Britain, that's what they used against Poland already. So 1939 sees victory in Poland, also victory in the sense that they're not at war with the USSR just yet. 1940 is going to be the real Blitz, and Britain and France don't have a built-up expeditionary force that can go overseas, that can invade somewhere, and so there's going to be 8 months of we've declared war on you and nothing happens. We in class kind of compare it to if you challenge your neighbor to a snowball fight and they say they'll be right out and it takes them 6 hours to get out there, they're ready to fight when they come out, but you're really ready. You've built an 8-foot-high snow wall, and you've got a snowball machine gun and a turret over here and a gatehouse and all of this. You're just ready. And that's what happens. So when Britain and France declare war, they have to rearm their militaries. Meanwhile, Hitler gets to just kind of dig in. He digs in Poland, and he gets to dig in on the border with France. And 1940 is going to see what we call the Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War. And so the Blitz consists of quick troop movements, heavy armor deployment, so armor being armored personnel carriers, and also tanks. They're really big into tanks, and supported by the Air Force. And that's going to be kind of a deadly combination, and it's got to be fast, kind of like in World War I, where they needed to knock out their enemies really quickly, left and right. They did it with Poland. Now see if they can do it with France. And they're able to do that with France. In 1940, they start moving across the border. The French think they're going to come through Belgium again. If you look at the border between France and Germany, there's a region, and southern Belgium, there's a region called the Ardennes Forest. And the Ardennes Forest is very hilly, it's very rocky, lots of rivers and streams, but also extremely dense forests. And the thought is that there's no roads through there. No military can get through there. It's too well defended. The French also have what's called the Maginot Line there. It stretches over 100 kilometers. It's this massive underground fortification with these turrets that kind of stick up out of the ground. It's connected by an underground train, and it's extremely well fortified. There was just no way anybody could get through there. So the French think they must be coming through Belgium again. And that's where France sends most of its troops north through Belgium. And the Germans realize this, that the French have fallen through a trap. And instead of bombing them, instead of destroying them there at the border of Belgium, they allow the Belgian forces, or the French forces, to move deeper and deeper and deeper into Belgium, basically removing them from what's going to be the actual battlefield, which is the Ardennes Forest. The German tanks are powerful enough to just simply ram the trees and knock them down. There's actually footage of that in the documentary. Ramming these trees and knocking them down, they make roads. And as the narrator mentions, the only thing that slowed them down was actually their own traffic jams. They brought so many troops through that border that they slowed themselves down. And eventually Hitler is going to maneuver in what he called the sickle cut, which moves west and north. And he's actually able to divide the French forces, who are going to move towards Paris, from the British forces, who are going to move north towards the coast. And they get trapped at a city called Dunkirk. There's recently a movie about this siege of Dunkirk, where some 300,000 British Expeditionary Force soldiers are going to be trapped on the beach of Dunkirk with no evacuation, no equipment, nothing. They have all their military equipment with them, but it's not going to do them any good to get home. This is going to be one of the first Allied victories of the war, is the evacuation of Dunkirk. The French soldiers who are there at Dunkirk are able to hold the German army, the Wehrmacht, off long enough for a civilian evacuation to be organized at Dunkirk. So the British government organizes all floating civilian vessels in the vicinity of the English Channel and brings them over. And over 1,000 civilian boats, everything from fishing boats to pleasure yachts to small, personal watercraft to big, commercial tankers and things like that. All of them are sailing across the English Channel all at once, and are able to evacuate most of the British soldiers, and even a lot of the French soldiers who will be sent back to continue fighting in France. Churchill famously says, wars are not won by evacuation. He's kind of putting this into perspective and not wanting everybody to be so overjoyed that, yes, we did get the army out of harm's way, but they didn't win. It was because they lost. And now Britain's even in an even tighter spot, because they took 8 months to rearm their military. Well, now they left all their equipment over for the Germans to take, so it's going to take them even longer now to resupply. So they will not be back until 1944, when they are part of the D-Day landing. And then 1941, finally, this, if you look at, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. It's going back. Here we go. There it is. By 1941, this is France. The northern, that yellow part there, is what's occupied by Germany, and the southern part there is what's called Vichy France. Vichy became the new capital. The Germans weren't able to occupy all of France, but basically, when the French moved the capital to Vichy, The new Vichy government immediately surrendered and said, we will become an ally, and they become what's called a collaborating government. They're working with the Germans. And so Vichy, while not directly occupied and under the control of the Nazis, it's pretty much under the thumb of the Nazis, and they will do whatever they want, which means, and right down here in the Mediterranean Sea is the French Mediterranean Navy. That means that Navy is now potentially under German control. So now the Germans have two navies, at least, and that's going to be a problem. So the British are actually going to destroy the French Navy, even though they're allies with the French. This French government is not allies with them. So jumping back to 1941 here. In 1941, Hitler breaks his non-aggression pact with Stalin and invades the Soviet Union. The whole goal is to create this vast Eastern colonial empire. And that's kind of where we're going here in the next one. This operation to break the Soviet Union is called Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa. Okay, so Europe under Nazi occupation. This map here kind of shows us where the Nazis occupy. The red in the middle, those are the Axis powers. They're in Europe. The yellow is territory that is occupied by Germany. So Germany occupies Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, and France, as well as Poland, North Africa, Serbia, Greece, and then they're going to start carving off parts of the Soviet Union. It's an enormous empire, and this is where empires start to fall apart. When they get so big that you can't manage all the pieces, that's when things start to fall apart. But we're not quite there yet. So this new order, the whole idea is it's a new racial order, a new racial hierarchy. The Germans represent the Aryan master race, which they're going to be perfecting through eugenics and things like that, which we're getting to in the next slide. We're going to talk more about that. The Nordic peoples, the Nordic races, will be kind of second, right underneath the Aryan race, because they are genetic cousins, I guess you could say. Underneath them would be the French, tolerated, not necessarily to be exterminated or killed off, but marginalized. They should be marginalized. And then underneath them would be Ukrainians, Poles, and Russians. There's a plan for those three groups, and then underneath them would be Jews. The British are in there, but they're not occupied. They're kind of up there with the Nordic peoples. This whole time before, at least before the D-Day landings, Hitler's kind of still hoping that he can work with the British. That maybe things aren't going to be so tense between them. But anyways, occupation policies. The occupied nations were forced to pay the cost of the war for Germany. And what this did essentially was it maintained a high standard of living back in Germany. So German citizens were not bearing the brunt of the cost, the social, emotional, but also financial and industrial, agricultural costs of the war. Those burdens were placed on occupied peoples. And so this war of annihilation is part of the occupation policy, this vast Eastern colonial empire that they're starting to build with first Poland and then the Baltic states down there, kind of Serbia, Yugoslavia, that area. The Soviet Union territory that they're taking, that's all going to be part of their Eastern colonial empire, and it's going to be filled with Germans. That's the living space, the Lebensraum that Hitler keeps on talking about. And you can't live in a place where people already live, so you got to get rid of them. And so part of this occupation policy and the new order is this war of annihilation, where they're going to get rid of the Ukrainians, the Poles, and the Russians by enslaving them. Basically, they will be slaves and they will be worked to death. And when they're gone, great, no more problem. They'll get all the work done for us. Jews are simply going to be exterminated. So before the war actually breaks out, Jews are forced in Germany, anyways, to wear this yellow star over here, identifying this is part of the Nuremberg laws, which identified them as Jewish. But of course, with all of these heavy-handed policies, there was resistance. Every single country that is occupied by the Nazis is going to have its own independent resistance movement. This woman down here on the left holding a machine gun, she is a part of the French resistance outside Paris. And the guy on the right, he's Polish. His name is Jan Karski. He wrote a really amazing book called story of a secret state where they basically formed an underground Polish government. And he was the only one who was actually able to talk to world leaders during the Holocaust while it was going on, was able to talk to them in person. This guy was kind of the Forrest Gump of his day. He spoke with Winston Churchill in person. He spoke with the Pope in person, and he spoke with FDR, President Roosevelt, in person. He was able to escape Poland. It was able to get to some of the Allied countries, and was able to start affecting some change there. The resistance movements are never going to be able to topple Nazi control in their respective countries, and they're never going to be able to band together. And the German response to these are going to be these resistance movements is going to be really brutal. They're going to capture any members that they can, and then they're obviously not afraid to use torture and other means like that to get people to turn over other members. And so that's going to be a real danger for anybody who's part of those resistance movements. And that kind of brings us to this. The Holocaust it's actually an ancient biblical term that was used in the Old Testament, or it's used in the translation of the Old Testament, kind of to mean sacrifice or total destruction. It's total destruction. And so this is the kind of collective, systematic attempt at destroying all of the European Jews. The Nazi party platform calls for the total destruction, total annihilation of European Jews, as one as a religion, but also as an ethnic group as well. So that's where all of those ideas come in. The racial purity piece is going to actually start with the Germans themselves, with euthanasia, being putting somebody down. It's usually seen as like an act of mercy, when we do it with like animals. When you do it with people, we also call it murder. And so the Germans are actually going to murder almost 70,000 of their own people who are mentally and physically handicapped, but also people who exhibit traits that they're not 100% sure if they can be passed on genetically, but they're not willing to take the chance. Things like drunkenness, laziness. And so they're also going to use forced sterilization. So they will force sterilization on about 200,000 people in Germany, some Germans, some Jews, also a lot of gypsies. And a lot of these undesirable populations will be forced to live in certain areas as their rights are stripped away, as they had to follow the Nuremberg laws, as they have to follow, all of these laws that slowly start stripping away a bunch of their rights. They can't vote anymore. They can't participate in elections. They can't hold government positions. And eventually the Third Reich just simply says, okay, you're stripped of your citizenship. You are now, strangers in a strange land, essentially. I guess strangers in a familiar land. And they are herded into what we call ghettos. Ghettos are parts of cities that are, in this case, were literally walled off. People could not leave. And it was basically to keep undesirable populations out of sight, out of mind, and we'll deal with them later. It allowed the Germans to at least know where these people are. And if we don't have a plan for them right now, if we do later, we know where they are. We know where to get them. As the Germans move into the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, as they're moving into the Soviet sphere, they're moving through civilian areas that have a lot of peasant populations, and also a lot of Jewish peasant populations. And so there's a special group called the Einsatzgruppen. The Einsatzgruppen, it means special action units. These special action units, their whole job, they're death squads. They were there to clean out this area. If you go back a couple of slides, we talked about kind of the war of annihilation. We're going to eventually get rid of the Ukrainians, the Poles, and the Russians, but right now we're going to get rid of the Jews, and that's kind of their goal. And so this photo over here on the right is a picture of one of the Einsatzgruppen doing their dirty work. These guys are standing in their own graves that they dug. And so these groups, this is obviously a pretty horrible job, and these are human beings that we're talking about. Even the guys doing the work of the Einsatzgruppen, they're human beings, and work like this does take a toll on you, no matter what you've been taught, no matter what you've grown up believing or heard or even seen, whatever it is. This is going to cause some problems for them psychologically. And so to medicate that, and also what ends up making things worse is the Third Reich ends up, and they're part of the SS. So the SS high command ends up giving these guys methamphetamines and copious amounts of alcohol to cope with the work they're doing, which makes them, kind of, it's like taking a pit bull off the leash. What you've done is you just souped this thing up and turned it wild with no rules and now no inhibitions. So the death squads are going to be pretty terrible. And there's some footage in one of those documentaries, I've labeled it the Einsatzgruppen piece, where they stop digging ditches because it's too time consuming. These mass grave ditches, they stop digging those. It's too time consuming. So what they actually do is they find ravines, river valleys, march whole cities of people in there and just start shooting them. And then once it's full of dead people, they cover it with dirt and they just fill the ravine. It's already dug for them. So it's going to be pretty disgusting. And this guy down here is in charge of it all. This guy in the bottom right-hand corner, his name is Heinrich Himmler. He's the leader of the SS, maybe more evil than Hitler. I don't know. He's up there. And he's the one who will come up with the idea for the final solution, this idea of, we can put these people in camps. We can move them from ghettos to camps. We'll work them to death in the work camps, and we'll just kill them in the death camps. And that's the solution to what he calls the Jewish question. Questions always have solutions. That's his. So Himmler actually attends one of these mass killings of the Einsatzgruppen, and somebody standing near him is shot, or he shoots somebody, and he actually gets blood spattered on his uniform. And weird thing, blood makes Himmler queasy. And so he doesn't want to participate anymore. He thinks this is inefficient. It's taking too long. And so they start coming up with various ways to kill people more efficiently. The first one is the gas bans. So when they arrest people, instead of taking them out to the forest and shooting them and burying them, they simply put them in the back of a van where the exhaust pipes have been rerouted into the cargo section of that van. So they get killed on the drive out to the forest, and then they can bury them there. Eventually, they will hook that van up, or a diesel truck. They'll hook that diesel truck up to a room, and they'll crowd everybody into that room and turn the truck on and just run it at full, pedal to the metal for about 30 minutes. And that is enough. In about 30 minutes, that's enough to kill about 800 people. And they would cram about 800 people into 45 square meters, which is not very big. In fact, some of the camp directors described it as people didn't even have room to fall when they died. They were still standing. And so these are the first gas chambers. Eventually, at the death camps, they will move to chemicals like, pesticides and herbicides, famously Zyklon B, and chlorine gas and things like that, things that you definitely cannot survive. And so that is the final solution. I tagged a video of Auschwitz today. If you ever have a chance to visit a concentration camp, you should take that opportunity. It's absolutely haunting. The other picture down here, bottom left, that is the wall of the Auschwitz gas chamber today. And so those marks are fingernail, claw marks, from people who were trapped in that room as they died. And we had kind of a little discussion in class about the perpetrators and their motivations. Are the German people as a whole responsible for this? How much responsibility do they bear? How much rests on people like Himmler and Hitler? And how much responsibility rests on those outside of Germany? Anti-Semitism was not a German thing. The French turned over Jews. There were Polish people who turned over Jews. The 6 most famous death camps are going to be in Poland. And so there were a lot of motivations, and historians still debate this, so I don't have an answer here. This was just something that we kind of reflected on in class, is that there were lots of motivations. Some people were motivated by careerism. They didn't want to say no because they didn't want to lose their job or their status. They didn't want to, they did bow to peer pressure and things like that. And so there were maybe a lot of reasons that this happened. And so we kind of just we're discussing in class, how do you get to the point where you can dehumanize people so much that you can now do this to them? And kind of where the discussion led was, well, when you only have one voice, when you only have one voice allowed, and that was the voice of Hitler. All other political parties were forbidden. All social organizations were run by the party. When you only have one voice, when there's only one message, and that message is hostile to some group of people, this is the inevitable conclusion. When you're not allowed to voice opposition, when you're not allowed to pump the brakes on an idea, when you're not allowed to say no to something, this is where it goes. You're starting the snowball at the top of the mountain. It's this big. By the time it gets to the bottom, it's enormous. So that's kind of where we left it in class, and that's where I'll leave it with you. I recommend watching those videos, and have a great day. Thank you for watching.